11, I believe. That's with her passion for bird watching, and she'll tell you more about her journey. But we're really pleased to have you here with us today. So I'll just, I mean, we've already started the session, but I'd love to hear your journey on where you started, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be quick, I suppose, but like you said, my name's Maya Rose. My family's from Sylhet district, but I have grown up in the UK, and I have been involved in environmental and climate change activism for 9 years now, since I was 11 years old. And that's taken lots of different forms over the years. The reason I first got into activism was because of a terrible oil spill that happened in the Sundarbans, actually, in I think 2013, that no one in the West or the UK seemed to care about. Since then, I've spent a lot of time talking about climate change, and especially in terms of pushing for equality in terms of climate change, and trying to bring countries such as Bangladesh into the global narrative, making sure they're being heard on a global scale at events like COP. And essentially, I suppose, reminding our governments that this is an issue that has mainly been created by the West, like countries like America and the UK, and yet it is people in countries like Bangladesh who are suffering because of it. And so that's, I suppose, one of the main things I've been talking about the last few years. But yeah, again, sorry I'm late, and I'm sorry for interrupting.
No worries at all. So there was, Maya Rose has also published, 2 books now, right? A first one which highlighted 30, I believe, environmental activists or people working in that, and her recent book, which is like a memoir, right, which talks about your journey on conservation, climate change, racism, and mental health. I'm going to pick up a little bit on the racism aspect of this, because you're also leading Black to Nature, which is a UK organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sorry. So Black to Nature is a charity I set up when I was 13, and it is essentially fighting racism within environmental spaces in various different forms. In the UK, a very big problem is essentially Black and Asian children not being able to go into environmental spaces or green spaces, and them being unengaged from the climate change movement and protesting, despite it being a very youth-based movement. And so Black to Nature has done lots of different things, from very practical, like working with children on the ground, as well as various big campaigns over the years.
That's fantastic, and we picked up a little bit on that with our other panelists on the importance of engaging young people at an earlier age. So climate literacy, environmental literacy, and how our whole education system needs a bit of reform as well, that we need to be bringing these issues, and Roti mentioned, it's not a separate climate change environmental thing. This is embedded in all areas of our lives, right? It's how we dress, what we eat, how we travel. So it's great that that and being inclusive, which is again, as Sohaner mentioned, he's from the grassroots. He's from the coastal area of Bangladesh, and he's trying to get their voices across as well. So can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the challenges? Like, why is it the narrative that people of color have not been able to get involved, that space? Why is it not open to them?
Yeah, I think there's a few different things going on, actually. I think in a lot of Western countries, it's historically been perceived as a very white, middle-class thing to care about the environment, and I think it's only in the past few years that people have come to realise, as you talked about, how environmental issues and climate change completely ties into everything else, and how maybe it is in fact relevant to their lives. So I think there's been lots of that going on. I think in terms of the global narrative, you mentioned my book I've written, We Have a Dream, which I wrote that because I wanted to promote the voices of people, essentially indigenous people, Black people, Asian people, who weren't being heard within the climate change movement, who didn't feel that their voices were important, that people in the West didn't care about them. And I think there is a lot of that going on, where actually people to this day still feel that the environmental movement is a space where they won't be heard or respected or listened to. to the same degree that their white peers would be. And so I think it is all about sort of elevating people at a very global level and being like, actually, yeah, we do care about what you have to say, which I think actually, again, at COP27, that was one of the really big things. We were talking about essentially reparations and how to support countries who are already experiencing climate change in really devastating forms.
Absolutely. And we've also been talking a little bit about joining the dots and how do, people at the front line, people in international, young people we're talking about, how do you bring them together to, bring in that collective action. And both Sona and Dorothy have, so in Bangladesh there's the Youth Net and there's Eco Network. Is there, opportunities like that internationally that globally young people can get involved in? Have you?
Yeah, there are, and I think it's very exciting. There are obviously networks in lots of different countries all over the world, but I think increasingly young people have been amazing at sort of building up their own networks internationally and making it work at an international level. And I think in some ways young people have been much better than adults at realising that fighting climate change has to be international, it has to be interlinked. It connects into lots of other issues that we have going on in society to do with like race and class and gender. And so there haven't really been like pre-existing networks, but I'd say in the last 5 years or so, young people have taken it upon themselves to connect together between countries in order to, I suppose, make themselves stronger and make themselves louder.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I mentioned, I've been working in this space for 20 years now, but what I have been seeing, it has been the young people who are calling out the bullshit, really, and, getting past the jargon and the number and the data and the science and, talking about what needs to be done and, let's talk about these interconnected issues. As reading your book, and there's also this other theme around being outdoors and conservation and wellness, right? Like how, and again, we don't, here in Bangladesh, as we're moving more from, rural, we used to have playgrounds to play in, we used to be outdoors a lot more. Now, young people are more disengaged from nature in a way, in some ways. So, how do we address that? And, you talk a little bit about that. Can you?
Yeah, I think the role that nature plays in our lives is very underrepresented, I suppose. I think a lot of people don't realise just how important it is for our physical and mental well-being. It's so important for our brains. And it's only in the last couple of years, I think, that in the UK, hospitals and doctors have literally started prescribing going outside to people because it's causing people so many problems that they just aren't. But I think also in terms of the wider environmental movement to do with things like plastic pollution and climate change, I think part of that does go back to the issue that people aren't connected to nature and the outdoors and maybe don't have a respect for the outdoors in the way that they once did. And one of my favourite projects I've ever done actually was in the UK. I interviewed various elders from various communities who were first generation immigrants back in the 50s and the 60s about their childhoods and what it was like growing up in villages in very rural places, and it sounded beautiful. It was like something out of a film. And then to go only one generation down or two generations down to their children and grandchildren who think of themselves as urban people who have no connection to nature, who think they don't care about nature, when even to look back one generation that wasn't true. And so I think it's so important for our health, but I think also so important for the health of the planet that we're able to re-engage people with the outdoors.
I think we only have a few minutes, but I just had just two more questions for you, and we already asked how challenging is it for young people to engage with action you're taking or solutions to take it to the policy level? Has it from your experience, has it been the journey of trying to influence policy or talking to policymakers? What's that been like for you as doing this as a young person?
I think the brilliant thing about young people is they're very determined to make the world a better place. And actually the reason I was late today was because of the student protests just down the road. I think young people are very determined to try and make their voices heard. And so I think the last maybe 5 years where young people have become very engaged with the climate change movement. That is when we've seen a lot of big change happening and climate change being put on the global stage, basically. Things like COP26, COP27, suddenly making international news when before people didn't really seem to care very much. And so I think already young people have made a very big difference in terms of how governments and politicians are talking and thinking actually about environmental issues. But it's very strange because I think at the same time, people are always very uninterested in what young people have to say, and people never really want to talk to young people, which maybe is why they're so loud in the first place. But I think obviously there's still such a long way to go, but there is so much that can be done, and I think actually it's all of the activists, all of the environmentalists I've met over the years who actually make me feel very hopeful, very optimistic about the future of the planet, the future of environmentalism, because people are so strong and so determined that I think how could they not win?
That's okay. I agree 100%, and you know, always here to support more voices from young people, loud and clear, and just you know, do your bit, because we're messed it up plenty from the older generation. But as Sonur said, it has to be intergenerational equity as well. You know, it's all fine to say, okay, we've done our bit now, you all clean up the mess. You know, I think we all need to be part of supporting young people, and all of us doing our bit to make the changes that needs to be done. I'm going to open it up to questions now from the audience. I know we have already asked Roti and Sonur some questions. If anybody had any questions for Myros here?
I had a question actually to all of you who are working with environment. So in our Bengali culture, in the middle class family, we have seen that our parents, they are not consciously environment conscious, but their actions are protecting environment. Like my mother preserves food in the packaging of chips, and she preserves fluids in plastic bottles that were used for different beverages, and they optimize water and electricity. So my question was, are Bangladeshi middle class families doing enough? Are they doing good to protect the climate, or is it like nothing, or is their effort? I mean, what is the level of their effort? Are they making significant changes, or their efforts are not that significant? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question, thank you. I think one of the interesting things about that is there are lots of people who would not consider themselves environmentalists or who know much or care much about environmental problems, but they are doing the little things that do help. And I do think there's sort of two types of change that we really need to see in terms of environmental issues, and one is the very big things, you know, government change, policy, bills, but the other part is much more quiet. It's what we're doing, the actions that we're taking day by day. And so I think it's, even though it's not perfect and it's still, to be honest, miles from where we need to be, I think it's such a good starting point to have those conversations with people. For example, if they said, I don't care about the environment, and you can say, actually, but you're doing this and this and this already, why not do this as well? And so I think using that framing to talk to people about, you know, trying to help with climate change is very important. But yeah, at the same time, I also think trying to force change from government is incredibly important as well. So maybe thinking about like what cars people are buying, or I don't know, where they're buying their food from and things like that is maybe the next step up from that.
Thank you all. I just wanted to add to that, even though the question wasn't addressed at me, but it really relates to the question you asked. So when I was young, when I was their age and working in this front, my grandmother-in-law, my husband's grandmother, and she lived in UK, and the examples she gave, you know, she's like, you all environmentalist now. I mean, exactly what you said, the how she used packaging, how she bathed. She talked about being able to bathe with 7 cups of water, just being but just how efficient that generation was, even though they didn't call themselves conservationists, environmentalists, climate change wasn't a thing, but there are things we can pick up from that generation that there's things that we can add to the solutions. It's not new. Some of it is not just let's not reinvent the wheel, and we can pick up so much from our older generation. So I think there is that need to have the intergenerational knowledge and conversations of how we come up with the solutions for today. Any other last question?
আমরা যখন আমাদের ক্লাইমেট নিয়ে কাজ করতে যাচ্ছি তখন আমাদের প্রথমত মনে হয় যে বিশেষ করে একটা সমস্যা দেখা দেয়, সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমরা হয়তোবা কেউ এনভায়রনমেন্টাল ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড থেকে আসি না, এডুকেশন সেক্টর থেকে, কিন্তু আমাদের এডুকেশন সেক্টরটা যদি ছোটোবেলা থেকেই আমাদের প্রাইমারি এডুকেশনটা যদি আগে থেকেই আমাদেরকে ক্লাইমেট নিয়ে শিক্ষা দিত বা কোনো কারিকুলাম অ্যাক্টিভিটিস থাকতো, তাহলে মনে হয় না আমাদের এই সমস্যাগুলোর মধ্যে পড়তে হতো। আমাদের বেসিক নলেজটা আমরা আগে থেকে পেয়ে যেতাম। তো আমাদের যে প্যানেলিস্টরা আছেন তাদের কাছে আমাদের জানার আগ্রহ যেটা আমরা কিভাবে এই সমস্যাটা উত্তরণ করতে পারি।
Yeah, I think the role of education in terms of climate change is so important, but I think also, and I think, like you said, I think a lot of people maybe don't understand how their actions link to the science, link to the reality. But I think also what maybe people don't talk about enough is how important emotion is when it comes to talking about climate change as well. For example, there are so many young people I know in the UK who didn't really care about climate change, even though they understood it intellectually, they understood the science, they didn't really care. And it was only when having conversations, talking about how family back home, whether that was, Bangladesh or a country in Africa or wherever, and being like, actually, the drought that your family is experiencing, the flooding that your family is experiencing, that is climate change, that is what you're fighting against. And I think making climate change into something that instead of being sort of far away and in the future is now and is affecting people now and will affect people, will affect you. I think that maybe that is missing from a lot of this discussion about climate change, because it is very scientific and very factual, or even very sort of political a lot of the time, but it's maybe not emotional, and I think that is what we need more of to engage people.
Thank you. I think, all your points, really, the education, how it's taught, and so important, linking up, with more than just the teaching. There's emotional, being able to connect. How do you connect people so they want to take it inside and, want to do something about it. So once again, I'm going to say a big thank you to our panelists here, to Maya Rose and Roti and Sonor. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you to our audience for being with us for the past hour and a half. I'll now bring it to a close, and thank you once again.